I've recorded the whole series of classes that I give on Sunday morning about 3 years ago. And somehow the first class never came out well. So I recorded it again, first class in the series, the next time. And it was just one of those mornings where I was extremely hassled and not really myself. So I decided I'll do it again when it comes around. So now it's come around. It's actually the beginning of the cycle, but there is no beginning to learning of Torah, and anybody comes into my classes can come in at any particular point. And when I begin repeating myself a few times, you know you've got through it. We will be meeting the next few weeks, this week and next week, and then after that, my class will shift into our adult education program, which will be on the Ten Commandments that I've been teaching for the past couple of years, and it'll be entitled Sex and Violence, the Second Tablet, which is about what the Second Tablet is about. And I find that the whole study there to be fascinating, how Judaism views human relationships from the standpoint of love and the standpoint of violence, and also from the standpoint of marital relations. They're going to spend a great deal of time on that. But today's class is about the cornerstones of Judaism. There are 4 pillars of Judaism. For purposes of structure, we follow in this particular class the book "To Be a Jew" by Rabbi Chaim Donin. It's a great book. He is an Orthodox rabbi like myself from Yeshiva University in a congregation in Detroit, a traditional congregation very much like this one. And he wrote it for his congregants as part of his adult education program. But I've been using it for, 25 years or so since it came out. And it never gets stale. 1972, 25 years. And it just doesn't get stale. And it's a great book to have because it's got an index in the back and where you can look up just about anything you want to about Jewish life, and it really has it in there. It doesn't have it in depth usually because it's only one book, but it's there. And a corollary book that I would recommend to people to read. It's a book by Blue Greenberg called "How to Run a Traditional Jewish Household," which gives the same information as in here, but from a woman's perspective. And I think that's important for all of us to read, men and women. And she's an Orthodox Jewish feminist. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. So I find it fascinating. And she's one of my favorite people. So is her husband, Yitzgreen, who's been in Atlanta many, many times speaking, and usually comes about once a year. There are 4 pillars to Judaism: Israel, the people; Israel, the Torah; Israel, its God; and Israel, the land. Right. And a table needs 4 legs to stand well. You take a leg away, it could still stand, but it's not so secure. You take 2 legs away, it doesn't stand anymore. So we've been a Jewish people existing with 3 pillars for 2,000 years, and now finally in our generation we have a 4th pillar, the land, which we didn't have. But it's quite remarkable how we stood for 2,000 years with only 3 legs, a shaky foundation, but we stood. And I wonder how many of us really appreciate the strength that Judaism and Jews have gotten because of the state of Israel over the past 50 years. It's remarkable. Those of you not Jewish can't remember, but I could tell you uh, growing up in the 50s in New York, in Brooklyn, where my neighborhood was 99% Jewish. And if I walked out of shul, God forbid, a synagogue on a Sabbath, and forgot to take my kippah off and put it in my pocket, and someone reminded me, pointed to me, I was terribly embarrassed that anybody should see I was Jewish. The neighbor was 99% Jewish. Give me a break, right? But it was a mentality. Like, we shouldn't appear too Jewish, because we won't be treated well by the non-Jews of the world. That was a carryover mentality. Of course, we don't have that anymore, and thank God for that. And we've learned a truism in America that the American world will respect us more when we emphasize our Jewishness more. I was reading a great book. I just finished. I'm going to better get it in the gift shop. So it should be coming there in a few weeks. What every Jew needs to know about God. You're shaking your head. You heard?
I've seen it.
You've seen it? It's brand new. By Michael Levine. Well, you probably can buy it in a regular bookstore. But it's not by the big publisher. It's by Katav. Very well done. As Michael Levine has done many books, and he's not a rabbi. But
What's the name of the book?
what every Jew must know about God, or should know about God. I found it really fascinating. And in this book, he draws many analogies and sets the table in America of how we came to be where we are as Jews, and what are the real problems that Jews face in America. And he draws the analogy that, except for the Orthodox world, conservative, reform, reconstructionists have built their foundations upon three pillars: State of Israel, philanthropy, and the Holocaust. And I would add a fourth pillar, which he doesn't mention: liberalism, especially among Reform Jews, to have a liberal, active social agenda. Whether it was when I was growing up fighting against the war in Vietnam, or working for social causes, whatever it is, that's part of the agenda. The problem is, if you base why be Jewish on social agenda, you don't have to be Jewish to help make this a better world. I mean, you could volunteer for the Atlanta Project or the shelter here or wherever, hospitals. You don't have to be Jewish to do that. And the State of Israel is important. But what's happening in the world today, Jews don't really feel that there's a great need for them to support the State of Israel anymore. They're not afraid. There's not that fear about the State of Israel and its future. We think it's strong, and it will be strong. It'll continue to live. And you can't base a theology, a belief, a faith on the Holocaust because it's too negative. And philanthropy is nice, but you have to have a reason to give. Right? And so he says what's really missing from his perspective is the fourth cornerstone, which was God. And the past 150 years, people have gotten away from talking about God. And so we're going to talk about the three pillars: the land, the Torah, God, and the people, and all in terms of God and the spiritual search. What's really missing from Judaism today, except for the Orthodox world, and I would put in that category with the Orthodox traditional congregations, because traditional congregations are places where people are coming to seek God and really want to have are not afraid of their tradition. Let's go through the four pillars. Are we Hebrews? Are we Israelites? Or are we Jews? And how do you define those terms?
We're all them.
For all three, right. Well, what do they mean?
The Hebrews probably the culture, right? Or the language.
Well, we were Hebrews first. Let's take it in order. We were Hebrews first. Who was the first Hebrew? Abraham. And why was Abraham called Hebrew?
Because he crossed over.
Hebrew, the word Hebrew, Ivri in Hebrew. We say Hebrew in English, but if you read it in Hebrew, it's Ivri. Ivri means to cross over. So Abraham grew up in Mesopotamia. He had a great position there. His father had a franchise on the idol market. You know, if you wanted an idol, you had to go to his father, to his idol store to make it. And the Midrash is full of stories about that. So his father had position, he had wealth, he had family. And there's stories about him when he was a child, when Abraham was a child. His father left him in the store to mind the store for a while. And a very, very famous story where his father comes back and all the idols are chopped in pieces, right? Right? So how did that happen? Well, a woman came into the store and said, an old woman, I'd like to buy an idol because I'm sick. And I want to pray to this idol. He said, I just made this idol yesterday out of wood. You want to pray to it? It's going to make you better? You're 70 years old, and this idol's only a day old? You think this is going to make you better? And that went on all day. Finally got tired of it, and he took an axe and he chopped up all the idols, except for one, the big one, and he put the axe in the hand of the idol. So the father comes home and said, what happened? He said, well, the big idol killed all the other idols. He said, idols can't do anything, they're only wood. He said, aha. So we're trying to defraud all these people. We're defrauding. Abraham went through a great search, spiritual search. People believed in idols. But what happened to the belief in God? We know, we read in the Torah yesterday about Adam and Eve. They believed in God. God spoke to them. Where did it get lost along the way? How did they go from direct contact with God, speaking to Him, like Adam and Eve did, and Cain and Abel spoke to God? How did they go to the direct contact to worshiping idols?
People wanted physical.
What?
When they wanted something physical, they can relate.
Yes. Yes. How do you think? What's the psychology behind that? Well, our rabbis are very troubled by that and trying to figure out really how this happened. I mean, Freud has his own views. He believes that when a chieftain dies, actually a chieftain of a tribe will be killed by his son wanting the power, and the son in guilt puts a monument to his father, and everybody comes and worships there. And that's how it began. We don't believe that, but we believe that idolatry begins when people want to get close to God, but they're afraid. They're afraid that it may be too powerful, or they don't know how. So they try to find something that represents God, whether it be the sun, or the moon, or the mountains, or whatever. Whether it be an idol. Idolatry begins as a representation of God, and then you start to look to the sun, and you forget about the Father. Using a modern analogy. So idolatry actually begins with God, but then God is forgotten. Abraham grew up in this corrupt world where people were very much caught up in themselves, and they worshipped gods when they thought it could help them. They were egocentric. They worshipped fertility gods when they couldn't conceive, or they worshipped the gods of agriculture that they made up when they wanted their crops to increase, or for whatever reason it was. And it was more of a selfish thing. Abraham comes into this world and he says, this is not for me. And he tries to find his way and he seeks out truth. And he finds a relationship with one God. He goes through the phases of the sun and the moons and the powers of the world, and he finds out that there is one God. He comes back to the belief of his ancestors, of Adam and Eve, of Noah. And people don't like that. People are upset by it. People don't like to be reminded that they're on the wrong path. So God tells him, I'll tell you what, Abraham, I want you to leave your birthplace, leave your father's home, leave your family, leave your position, leave everything behind, and I want you to go to the land that I shall show you. You're going to cross over. So what is he going to cross over? He's going to cross over the river. What's the river? The Euphrates River, the big, big river, the Euphrates. So he's a person who crosses over, leaves his life behind, he's not afraid. How old was Abraham when he went on this new journey in his life?
He's older.
Huh? He was 70 years old. 70, that's not so old today, but it was old at one time. So it's never too late to begin a new career in your life. Wherever you are and you think you're stuck, think of Abraham at 70, who just leaves everything behind, and he follows a vision. He crossed over. He wasn't afraid. He had the courage to do it, and the vision, and the fortitude, and God will be with him. And it wasn't easy, and he went through lots of hardships and trials and difficulties. You'll see as you can come to the synagogue in the next few weeks, as we go through the story of Abraham. We'll begin the story at the end of the Torah portion next week, and you'll see that. Okay, so that's the word Hebrew. When did Abraham live? About when? 1800. About 1800 BCE, which would be I don't know. Was that about 4,000?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Almost.
It's 4,000. Okay. By the way, Abraham went out preaching to people that they should become of the faith. And when Abraham preached to the men, his wife Sarah preached to the women. We're not an exclusive club. Jews are not an exclusive. Anybody can join. Anybody can join. And when you join, become a Jew, it's a very unique experience. Why would one want to become a Jew? Today's world, Abraham has succeeded in a great sense. It's spreading the faith of God all over the world. Actually, most of the world believes in one God. I may have a little distorted view of it. I mean, the Muslims have a very defined monotheism. Christians' monotheism is not quite as firm among many Christians with the Trinity. But it's really, most Christians believe in one God. They don't believe in more than that. Why bother becoming Jewish? We believe that you probably that if you're not Jewish, and if you're a good person, you probably have your space up in heaven somewhere. If you haven't killed too many people this year or done some terrible things, you probably have your spot. Why bother being Jewish? Okay.
My wife's in a sisterhood meeting. She's got 5 minutes.
It's okay. And when one takes on the obligation to be Jewish, there are many more obligations. How many obligations does a non-Jew have?
7.
The 7 commandments of Noah, which you can read about in the synagogue next week. It's like 10 Commandments civilization stuff. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. Establishment of courts for all, be kind to animals, things like that. But when you become Jewish, you move from 7 to 613. Wow, that's a big change. Actually, we have 613 commandments, but only about 250 of them are applied to you, because some only apply to Kohanim, and most of us are not Kohanim priests. Some only apply to Levim. Most of us are not Levim. So many of them apply only in the land of Israel when we have the temple, and we don't have. We're not in the land of Israel. We don't have the temple. So most of us, about 250, is still a lot. It's still a lot. My point is, we're not an exclusive club, and that anybody can become part of the Jewish people, and we can all be Hebrews. We can all be one who crosses over. One who becomes Jewish is like Abraham. It's like one who crosses over. One who was not brought up to be very Jewish and finds his Jewishness is also like Abraham. One who crosses over, leaves a certain life behind, takes on a whole new commitment in his life. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of faith to do something like that. And if you have faith and you have the vision that Abraham had, it'll work out for you. There's a story of that one of the itinerant preachers, the Dubna Magid of the 19th century, used to tell about Shabbat, about working on Shabbat. He said, you know, when there was an old man, a beggar, walking in the street with a big pack on his back, all his possessions with him. You know, like homeless people, they take all their possessions with them wherever they go. And this beggar was carrying his possessions, an old man, and a very wealthy man in a coach came by and saw this man and had pity on him. He said, "Where are you going?" He told him, "I'll give you a ride. Hop in." So he hops in the coach, sits down. His pack is still on the back. 5 minutes later, he goes, "Oh, so heavy, so heavy." 10 minutes later again, so heavy. So he kvetches and kvetches and kvetches about this thing on his back. Finally, the rich man said, "Please, take the pack off and put it on the seat next to you. This is enough that you're carrying me. You don't have to carry my pack too." God decides on Rosh Hashanah how much money, what's going to be for us for the year, how we're going to do with our business or whatever. He decides. Now, whether we work on Shabbos or we don't work on Shabbos, that's going to be, the bottom line is going to be the same at the end of the year. It'll come to us this way, or it'll come to us this way. You know what I mean? We think that because we have to work on Shabbos, God shouldn't have to work so hard. He shouldn't have to carry us. Well, it comes to us one way or the other, but it takes a lot of faith to do that. It takes a lot of faith for my in-laws who live in Los Angeles and before they retired had a woman's store, a women's clothing store in Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills, you make more money on Saturday than you make the rest of the week combined. Right? So they closed on Shabbos. People said you can't exist in Beverly Hills with a women's shop and be closed on Saturday. It won't happen. Meanwhile, they were in that store for 25 years. And there wasn't another store in all Beverly Hills that lasted for 25 years. Right? Might they have made a better living if they were open on Saturday? Probably not. Who knows?
I thought the rule was you can open on Saturday if you get a non-Jew to run your business and all the proceeds go to non-Jew.
No. If you have a partner who's who's not Jewish, and he opens on Saturday, he keeps all the proceeds for Saturday.
Yeah.
If they didn't have a partner, they would. Okay. And also, when you become part of the Jewish people, you become part of a family. Why did, was it a number of years ago, when Israel went into Ethiopia and had Operation Exodus and Operation Moses that I spoke about on Rosh Hashanah, why did essentially European Jews who were settled in the land of Israel care so much about Ethiopian Jews who had a different culture, who who
No,
were,
they're
they look very different. And they're very nice because they were Jewish. Because once you become Jewish, you become part of a family. And that, come on. And no matter how different you may be, physically, culturally, you're part of the Jewish family, and we care about you. And when I was in Brooklyn at the time of this Operation Moses in my synagogue in Sheepshead Bay, and when I went to people in my congregation, which was a middle class congregation, bordering on lower middle class, and I went to these people who never met an Ethiopian in their life, and I said, we needed money with all the other Jewish communities to raise money to bring them out of Ethiopia. They opened up their hearts and their wallets. Like, it was amazing. It was amazing. Because once you become Jewish, you become part of the family. And Kol Yisrael Avrevim Zebezeh, all Jews are responsible one for the other. That's truly a remarkable thing. You can never imagine a Jew fighting against a Jew. Christians have no problem. German Christians fighting against English Christians or American Christians, not a problem. A Jew can't imagine that ever happening. There are all kinds of stories that I hear from people who in World War One, because we had a situation in World War One where German Jews were in the army in World War One, and there were Jews in the Allied armies as well. Whenever there was the Germans would capture some of the Allies and they would take prisoners. If there was a German Jewish officer involved, and there were other Jewish prisoners, those prisoners would be treated absolutely royally. And Jews couldn't imagine themselves fighting against each other. It wouldn't happen. There's a quote here I want to read to you. At the bottom of page 9, if you have the book, you can follow. The Jewish people once described in these poetic terms: there is a river in the ocean. In the severest droughts, it never fails. In the mightiest floods, it never overflows. The Gulf of Mexico is its fountain, and its mouth is in the Arctic seas. It is the Gulf Stream. There is in the world no other such majestic flow of waters. Its current is more rapid than the Mississippi or the Amazon, and its volume more than 1,000 times greater. Its waters, as far out from the Gulf as the Carolina coasts, are of an indigo blue. They are so distinctly marked by their line of junction with the common seawater, they may be traced by the eye. Often one half of a vessel may be perceived floating in the Gulf Stream water, while the other half is in the common water of the sea. So sharp is the line, and such the want of affinity between those waters, and such, too, the reluctance, so to speak, on the part of the Gulf Stream to mingle with the common waters of the sea. This curious phenomenon in the physical world has its counterpart in the moral. There is a lonely river in the midst of the ocean of mankind. The mightiest floods of human temptation have never caused it to overflow, and the fiercest fires of human cruelty, though 7 times heated in the furnace of religious bigotry, have never caused it to dry up. Although its waves for 2,000 years have rolled crimson with the blood of its martyrs, its fountain is in the gray dawn of world's history, and its mouth is somewhere in the shadows of eternity. It too refuses to mingle with the surrounding waves, and the lines which divide its restless billows from the common waters of humanity are also plainly visible to the eye. It is the Jewish people. It's remarkable. We are Hama'at Mikol Ha'amim, the smallest of all the nations of the world, and yet the world focuses on the Jewish people all the time. Read the newspapers. It's hard to pick up a New York Times and not find some Jewish reference to Israel, what's going on in the Jewish world. We are less than 1/10 of 1% of the world's population. Who should care? Who should care? But they do care. They care very deeply. We have affected the world. The world has adopted Jewish values. This Judeo-Christian ethic. It's not Judeo-Christian. It's Judeo. But they've taken some of it and distorted some of it. But basically, it's a ethic from the Torah. Let me go over the other names. We are called Hebrew. What else are we called? Israel. Israel comes from the story of Jacob.
They call me wrestled with the angel.
What? Wrestled with the angel. I'll make it brief. I tell the story many times, and you'll hear me tell it again and again because the name is so important. Israel. What does it mean? It means wrestling with God. Wrestling with God. Father Jacob, for one reason or another, stole the blessing of his brother, Esau. His brother was furious and he had to run away. Comes back 22 years later. His brother's coming to greet him. Jacob has 2 wives, 13 kids. His brother's coming with 400 foot soldiers. He sent messages ahead and he knows he's coming with these 400 foot soldiers. Jacob's afraid, terrified. His brother's going to kill him now. Finally, after 22 years, why is he coming with these soldiers if not to kill him? So, night came and he knows that they're probably going to come in the morning. So he divides his camp into 2. In case one gets attacked, maybe the other can escape. And he can't sleep and he goes walking off in the wilderness. And then he gets mugged. And he fights with the mugger all night. And in the morning, the mugger says, let me go because the morning is coming and I have to go. Which is, I won't let you go unless you bless me. So he says, no longer will your name be Jacob, but Israel. Israel. Kisarita im el, because you wrestled with God and with man and have prevailed. So what's going on here? Who is this mugger? A lot of opinions are offered. But one of the one I like the most is that he was wrestling with himself. God had promised him before he left on his journey to escape from his brother 20 years before or so, that God would be with him. He would protect him. Here, his brother's coming to greet him with these foot soldiers. Maybe God doesn't keep his promises. Maybe God lies. Maybe God can't keep his promises. Maybe it was just a dream. Maybe there is no God. He was struggling in his desperate hour over his circumstance and his hope, faith. He had a crisis of faith. But in the end, he prevailed. He came out limping. Whoever he wrestled with wounded him in the thigh. And then we don't eat the synovane from the thigh from animals. It's called Gid Hanasha, in remembrance of that. He came out limping. Yeah, we go through struggles in our lives, spiritual struggles, when bad things seem to happen to us and we can't understand what do we do to deserve this? How could God let this happen to us? There's not a person in this room who hasn't gone through something like that in his lifetime or her lifetime. And you'll continue to do that again and again. And you come out limping sometimes. You come out with scars. But if you struggle, if you really struggle with it, if you really search for God and for help through it all, you will prevail. That's what Israel means. Israel means you struggle with God and you prevailed. The Jewish people have gone through, untold suffering. Persecution after persecution, the Inquisitions, the Holocausts, pogroms, all that. And we struggle with God's chosen people, what God chooses us to do, to suffer. What did we do to deserve this? 1.25 million children in the Holocaust? We struggle with our faith. It's not a bad thing to question whether there is a God or not a God, or questions about God. We don't discourage that. We encourage the struggle, because it's in the struggle that you will find your faith. That's what Israel means. That's why the name is so important. Yes?
In English, it's ambiguous when you say struggles with God, whether you're struggling along with God or against God. Is that true in Hebrew too? Is there ambiguity?
Right. Yeah. Uh, it's with. And with can be struggling together, and with can be struggling against, right?
Right.
Probably both. Probably both. There are times in everyone's life here where you've had that kind of struggle both ways.
But in the original sense of the word, was it also ambiguous?
I think so. That's why I'm pointing it out. We're also called Jews, right? Many people don't know this. We're called Jews because we're from the tribe of Judah. From the tribe of Judah. There are Jews that are from the tribe of the Levites, a tribe from the Levi, and those are Kohanim, priests, and Leviim are also from the tribe of Levi. And they survived because most of them were in Judea when the other tribes were taken away. It happened with the destruction of the first temple in that time. There was a split in the kingdom of Jews after King Solomon, who I would say about 900 or so BCE. And there were two kingdoms. Judea remained in the south, and the temple and Jerusalem remained in its territory. It absorbed some smaller tribes like Benjamin, maybe Dan. But the rest of the tribes in the north, the 10 tribes in the north, they were defiant. They didn't want to pay the heavy taxes that would be put on them to help support the temple in Jerusalem, and they started their own temple or their own worship shrines. And there was a lot of idolatry and paganism that influenced the northern kingdom more than the southern kingdom. And God sent lots of prophets to them, like the prophet Amos. And you go through the books of the prophets, you'll see. And they didn't change their ways. They didn't heed the warnings. And through the prophets, they were told there will be consequence. If you don't change your ways, God will destroy you. Well, the Syrians came down. They wiped out the northern kingdom, and they took them into exile and scattered them all over their great kingdom. And we find Jews had lived in places where we never knew there were ever Jews, like in Ethiopia, like in Bombay, like in I forgot the name, how to pronounce it, in central China, and in other places. How did they get there? They were living a biblical Judaism that was very different from the rabbinic Judaism that developed later. They were descendants, most scholars feel, of these 10 tribes that were scattered and dispersed. They were lost. So what was left were from the tribe of Judah, and we're called Jews from Judah. What does the name Judah mean? Well, we'll see in the synagogue in about a few weeks. We'll read about the birth of Judah from Father Jacob and Leah. And she says, when Judah is born, the mother names him, and she says, Hapam Oded Hashem, this time I will thank God. Yehuda means thanks. Judah means thanking God, thanksgiving. And it just so happens that Torah portion almost always falls out the week of Thanksgiving. Don't know why. It almost always does every year. And to be a Jew, one of the recognizable characteristics of a Jew has got to be the ability to give thanks, hakarat hatov, to recognize and appreciate the good that you have in your life. Just as you struggle when bad things happen, you must appreciate the good that you have. Otherwise, you'll never have a proper struggle. You'll never come to a proper solution in your life. It's an amazing thing that for all that we have endured as a people throughout the millennium, we have never become bitter. We continue to plant, to build, and to celebrate life. Always. Because we thank God for what we have. So that's the Jew. 3 names, 3 important aspects. When you read, someone who crosses over has the courage to leave behind him a different a way of life that he's become accustomed to, and to search for a more meaningful spiritual way. Israel, one who struggles with God, and Jews, one people who give thanks to God for the good that they have in their life. Okay. That's Israel, the people. Second pillar that Judaism is founded on is Israel, the land. For, I don't know, thousands and thousands of years, Jews have prayed for return to their land when they were off it. When they were in Egypt, they couldn't wait to get back to their land. When 40 years they struggled through the desert to get to their land. All of our major festivals, Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, deal with the journey and the struggle to get from Egypt through the desert to the land of Israel. Throughout our prayers, we face Israel and Jerusalem. And we, in every Amidah, 3 times a day, we say, ask for the restoration, our restoration of Jerusalem and our coming back to Israel. Why should a piece of land have this kind of attraction? Why should it be so important? You know, we're celebrating now the 100th year of the Zionist Congress, when modern Zionism began, when Herzl began the Zionist Congress in 1898, 1897, summer in 1897 in August. And the subsequent Zionist Congresses in the next couple of years, there were all kinds of plans that were put forth. They tried to go to the Sultan of Turkey, who ruled Palestine at the time, to get them to give him a parcel of land, and he refused, or to establish some sort of Jewish entity there. He refused. So they were buying land here and there. Jews were moving there, but they thought maybe they'd go a different direction. Like there was a Uganda plan. We'll buy land in Uganda. Uganda was basically unpopulated. Jews could move there. It was like a colonial state. I forgot which the European nations had it. And Jews can settle in Uganda. At least a place for them to go from all the persecutions that were happening in pogroms in Europe at the time. And just a few years after the Zionist Congress in 1904, 1906, you have the Kishinev pogroms where maybe 100,000 or more Russian Jews were massacred. My grandfather, may he rest in peace, told me stories about those pogroms. They were just absolutely horrible. Anyway, so why didn't we go to Uganda? Why didn't we take a Caribbean island or something that was deserted, or out in the South Pacific? Why? What's so special about the land of Israel? All right, we have some history there. Abraham was there.
That's the land God chose, right?
Yeah. You know, it's when I think it was Chaim Weizmann, one of the first president of Israel, when he was asked this question. Maybe it was someone else, but I think it was him. He was asked, "What's so special about the land of Israel? Let's go somewhere else." He said, he said to this person asking, "But you have a grandmother who lives in the suburbs of the country. It takes you 2 hours to go visit her. There are a lot of old people in your neighborhood. You can go visit them. You don't have to go visit your grandmother. Spend 2 hours." He said, "What's my grandmother? It's my blood. This is our land." It's that kind of connection. There is no real rationality to it. A Jew steps off the plane in Israel. With all the problems that Israel has, there's a different feeling stepping on that soil. It's amazing. And there's a holiness to that land that is, it's palpable. Really, you can feel it, sense it in the most profound way. 2,000 years, the land did not respond to anybody. The Jews were kicked off the land by the Romans in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries. And just thrown off. And the land became a wasteland. Malaria-infested swamps, trees, wouldn't grow. Nothing grew in that land. We're just raped and pillaged. Mark Twain visited 100 years ago the land of Israel, and he describes it as a great, great wasteland. Go to Israel now. It's amazing. Amazing what growth and prosperity there is there. You go, this is what indicative. You go to the Dead Sea, the lowest spot on earth, a place where nothing since the history of the world ever grew. Nothing ever grew in the Dead Sea. You go to the Dead Sea now, on the side of the Dead Sea now, you see orchards, avocados, tomatoes, other things. The Israelis have taken the soil, filled with salts and minerals, and they've washed it carefully, and they plant it, and the soil responds to them. It's amazing. It's amazing. Take a look at the forest they planted in Israel. Just where there weren't any trees 50 years ago. I mean, they're a huge forest. And remember about 5 years ago with the Intifada, with the some of the Palestinian uprisings, one of the tactics were to start forest fires. And we thought it was a terrible, devastating thing that they were burning down these forests that we took so long to bring up. And I was in Israel last January. I saw something amazing. Some of these forests were burnt to the ground. Because of the action of the heat of the burning and the fertile now soil from all this from all this carbon material now that was there. Seeds that were dormant for 2,000 years in that soil started to sprout, and now we have original foliage and trees that we never knew that there was in the land of Israel. Start to come through. The land responds to nobody but the Jews. It has not all these years, and we have that tie, and we live without it. Yes, we can live without it, but even if you live in America, you need to go every couple of years or so to Israel just to recharge your batteries. What it does is like, how do I explain this? I feel this way about prayer also. It's like, did you ever take when you're a kid, a big nail, wrap a wire around it, and put the two ends on a battery, and the nail became like a magnet? Did you ever do that as an experiment? Why does that happen? Because the electricity passing through the wire creates a magnetic field, electronic magnetic field of sorts, that aligns the electrons in a certain way, creating a magnetic field in that nail. And I don't know if I explained it 100% properly, but when you go back to Israel, you were like realigned. Your spirit gets realigned where it should be. So I need to do that every couple of years, as much as I can. I think every Jew needs to do that, and that's what happens when you pray every day as well. If you have like a spiritual alignment. So that's Israel, the people, and Israel the land. Now, Israel the God. I don't know where to begin to talk about God. One of the problems we have today is nobody talks about God. Not enough. Right? I told you that part of the problem of conservative reform and Reconstructionist Judaism is they don't talk about God. They talk about everything else but God. Actually, I submitted an article recently to a rabbinic publication challenging Reform and conservative and even Orthodox rabbis to talk more about God. We don't do it. We need to do it. Let me just give you a little God talk, a little bit. We're going to be talking a lot more about it as we go through the course of study, because God, the aspect of God, is really in everything. How do we know God exists? What are the traditional proofs for the existence of God?
Looking at nature.
Huh? Looking at nature? Okay. And and you think you see the complexity of nature?
Things that can't
Couldn't
be
happen, but
explained.
it couldn't happen by itself, right? That's like one of the classic theories of proving of God by theology. It's the watchmaker theory. If you're walking in the sand and you're on the beach, and you're kicking the sand, and you hit something, you pick it up, it's a watch. It's a watch. Now you see it's got a face on it, and the arms turn. It's got regularity, right? You don't assume the minerals in the water somehow by the actions of the waves over thousands of years came together and produced this watch. It's not going to happen. You don't assume that that's possible. Right? So, but wait a second. Why should we assume that the world happened haphazardly? There's order, regularity of the world. The sun comes up every day. It goes down every day. The moon comes up. There's a cycle in nature of the way things happen. Does it happen by itself? If you assume in a watch that regularity implies purpose, and purpose implies that there's someone who made it, why can't you assume that about the world? Right? There's other proofs.
What happened in Mount Sinai?
What?
What happened in Mount
What happened in Mount Sinai is what a proof of the existence of God. That the entire Jewish people. She's tended all my classes. That the entire Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai. That's right. Yud Halevi's proof. It's a proof of Torah, really. 600,000. Actually, it was more than that. Probably 2 million people give witness to revelation at Mount Sinai. That's how Judaism is different than any other religion in the world. Every other religion in the world is predicated upon one fact. God appeared to me last night and told me to tell you what to do. Right? Paul had visions of when Jesus came to him and told him what to do. Right? Muhammad had visions. God took Allah came to him and told him what to do. This guy Smith from the Mormons, right? Same thing. The Jewish people, everybody stood at Sinai. Everybody, the whole people, 600,000 and 620,000 males of fighting age, must have been 2 million people. We all stood there, and we believed that every Jewish soul that ever lived, or will ever be, was at Sinai as well. And even if they weren't born yet, the souls came around. Why is that? It's because it was a public thing, a real public thing. And it got passed down generation after generation after generation, the experience of Sinai. And if it was a fraud, if it was made up in order to get you to believe and follow a certain pattern, when in the past 3,200 years, 3,300 years did that happen? If you consider a generation of transmission from one generation to another, 40 years, right? 40 years. When you're 45 or so, and you have grandchildren, or 55 and have grandchildren, 40 years it will be a small cycle of generation of transmission, from eyewitness to eyewitness. How many generations would it take to make 3,200 years? 80, right? 80 generations. When in those 80 generations or so was this fraud perpetrated? And where's the evidence to it? And when did it change? There's no evidence. It's an unbroken chain. There was never any accusation ever that this was a fraud perpetrated. As a matter of fact, every single piece of Torah that they dig up thousands of years is exactly the same as we have now. It's word for letter. It's not like a telephone game that when it gets transmitted from generation to generation, it changes. Every letter is exactly the same. It's just another proof. Other proof that people bring as a proof There must have been a beginning. You know, we came from lower forms of life. They came from lower forms of life. Eventually came from a one-celled being that came from a fusion of hydrogen atoms in the sea with some electrical spark from lightning or whatever. You can go back and back, which came from energy matter was transferred from energy. Where did it start? There must have been a beginning. Well, for all these proofs, they're not logically infallible. You can make a logical point that, and say like Aristotle, that matter and energy are eternal. It always existed. There never was a beginning. You could say that logically, but it doesn't touch the heart. Because we still wonder about it. But for all of us, all these philosophical proofs won't mean a thing unless there's some point at some time in your life that you were just very needy, cried out to God for help, and He was there for you. And if you hadn't had that experience, I hope you do soon, because it can happen to all of us. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you cry out to God, and the grandmother should live, and she dies. She gets sick and she dies. Sometimes God's answer is no, and that's hard too. God can help you get through this. Maybe God's crying as well. My point is, with all the proofs of the existence of God, only by living a godly life and finding God in every aspect of your life, that you come to a point where it's no longer a matter of whether I believe. I don't have a belief in God. Rabbis say that's a very strange thing, isn't it? I don't believe in God. I don't. I experience God. I know God. I can believe that next year maybe the Braves will win the World Series. I can believe it, right? Do I know it? No, I believed it this year. It didn't happen, right? But I know God because I experience Him every day. And every one of you can do the same thing. And I hope to show you ways of doing that as we progress during the year. And for those of you who don't know it, I'm trying to put a book together now, Pathways to God, to help people through this process. Okay, so we did Israel, the people, Israel, the land, and Israel, it's God. And it's not enough God talk, but we'll get a lot more God talk as we go along. And I'm going to conclude with Israel, its Torah. We just celebrated Simchas Torah on Friday. We come and rejoice in the giving and receiving of the Torah, and we complete the reading of the Torah, and we begin it again. When I said to the children of a Hebrew school this week, trying to encourage them to come for Simchas Torah, to celebrate the Torah, I asked them, what is the greatest gift that God ever gave to the Jewish people? Of course, they all said the Torah. And I tried to show them, no other people in the history of the world have been taken off their land and survived as a people. Never happened. Except for the Jewish people. And the reason we were able to survive as a people is because of Torah. Because Torah gives us a unique way of life, a commitment to God, a way to live that makes sense, and gives us a sense of balance. And it's so important to appreciate that, and to celebrate that. Big holiday that deals with Torah, the giving of Torah, is Shavuot. Comes at 7 weeks after Passover. Commemorates the giving of the Torah. Now, every other holiday has so many symbols. Passover has the matzah. Rosh Hashanah has the shofar. Sukkot has the etrog and lulav and the sukkah. There is no Hanukkah has the Hanukkah menorah, Purim has the Gragar. There are no symbols for Shavuot, the festival, the giving of the Torah. I think that's remarkable. Unless you want to say cheese blintzes. Customary to eat cheese blintzes on Shavuot. The reason why there are no symbols for Shavuot, Shavuot commemorates the giving of the Torah. There cannot be a symbol for the Torah. The only way you can demonstrate your commitment to Torah is how? By studying it and living it. Living it. And Torah is like an onion. Talk about studying it. I mean, I say this most of you have heard me give this analogy. You just peel a layer, and there's another layer, and another layer, and another layer. And it never ends. Never ends. The depth of it all. If you want to read the book Codes in the Torah, the current book, you'll see some of what I'm talking about. The Torah ends with the word Le'enei Kol Yisrael, before the eyes of all Israel. And the last letter of the Torah, Yisrael, is a Lamed. The first letter of the Torah is a Bet. Well, let me put it this way. We completed the reading of the Torah and we begin it again. Lamed Bet is the Hebrew word Lev, which means heart. The last letter of the Torah and the first letter of the Torah. When you complete the Torah and start it again, that's where the heart is. That's where the Jewish heart is. Because the study of Torah never ends. That's one of the reasons the Torah begins with the second letter of the Aleph, Bet, the Bet, not the first, because there's never a beginning to Torah. Why does the Torah begin with the letter Bet? I'll write it out a little bigger, letter Bet. Bet has a very interesting characteristic. Huh? I think I pointed this out last week, right? Right. Last week? What is it?
Keep on, information keep coming in and out.
You're able to look forward, keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sealed off from what came above.
You don't see what's behind it.
It's sealed off from what's below. It's sealed off from what came before. It's only open to what comes now. And what's the last words of the Torah? Le'enei Kol Yisrael, before the eyes of all Israel. That's before the eyes of all Israel. However, what's in the Torah, in hidden ways, are many secrets. But what's for all the eyes of Israel? How to live your life. And so why doesn't the Torah start with commandments? Why does it start with the creation of the world? And all the stories of families. As I pointed out last year in Rosh Hashanah, all these families you have in the Torah, in the book of Genesis, here, are really what kind of families? Dysfunctional families. Every one of them. Take a look. Adam and Eve. What was the problem with Adam and Eve? Why did they eat the forbidden fruit? Because Adam didn't trust his wife Eve. How do we know that? Well, the snake says to her, you can eat from this tree. And she says, no, we can't do it because Adam told me that as soon as you eat from it, you die. He said you shouldn't touch it. Shouldn't touch it. If you look at the commandment that God gave Adam, he didn't say anything about the touching part. He said just don't eat it. So what does the Midrash say? As soon as the Midrash heard that he shouldn't touch it,
The snake pushed her up against
he pushed her. Very good. He pushed her to pushed her against the tree. She touched the tree, nothing happened. Oh, now I can eat it. Right, so she eats it. That's how they fall from grace, so to speak, happen. To use a quote. Why? Because Adam didn't trust her enough. It wasn't enough to say that God said you shouldn't eat it. He added the touching part because he didn't trust her. And Cain and Abel, brothers killing each other, right, over nothing. Silly fights. Noah with his family. We see that there was a homosexual incident almost after the flood, where the a couple of the sons uncover his nakedness. It wasn't very pleasant. Wasn't Torah's not very clear as to exactly what happened, but something happened there that shouldn't have happened. Then you have Abraham. Abraham and Sarah can't conceive. So Sarah forces him to marry her handmaiden Hagar. She has a child. He has a child. Because it's the ancient custom, if the child is born from her handmaiden, on her knees, it's like her child. But then this child turns out to be not such a nice child. After Sarah has a child and gives birth, that she doesn't like the way these two children are mixing, and she tells Abraham to send the child and the mother Hagar away, and he throws them out. Abraham's devastated. How can I throw them out? What should I do? He goes to God and asks God, what should I do? God gives him the best piece of marital advice ever invented. Yeah. All that your wife Sarah tells you, you listen to her. You remember that. That you remember, right? He says, don't worry, I'll protect them. I'll protect the child. I'll protect Hagar. They'll be okay. I'll make him a great nation. What problems. And then Isaac, you would think he was raised in a house where he was like a favorite. Ishmael, his brother, was thrown out. You would think when he had children, he had twins, Jacob and Esau, that he would give them equal love and treat them equally. No, they were favorites. And favorites wreaked havoc in that family. Jacob loved Esau, and Rebekah loved Isaac. Isaac loved Esau, and Rebekah loved Jacob. And then Jacob's children with the 12 sons and a daughter, and constant sibling rivalry, and they sell one of them into slavery. You could see through all the stories, every family was dysfunctional, just like yours and mine. There's no such thing as a functional family. However, what's the point of it all? Why does the Torah give us this in the first place? Why isn't the Torah if there's a guide for our life, why does the Torah just begin? Why doesn't it just begin with all the laws and tell us what we're supposed to be doing? Well, the rabbis asked this question. They gave different answers. Rashi's answer was very instructive. He says the Torah begins with the creation of the world to say that God created the world, and it shows us the lineage of Abraham and how God gave the land of Israel to Abraham and his descendants. So no one in the world should ever come and question the fact that this is the land of Israel, the land of the Jews. Interesting. And of course, Abraham purchased parts of the land, like Hebron, which we just gave back to the Palestinians 6 months ago, and the deed is recorded in the Torah. And so Rashi's, with a great biblical commentator, his approach is that we have this. The Torah has this first part, the Bereshit, with the creation and all the families, in order to show Israel's right to the land of Israel. I think there's a lot more there to it. There's a lot more there. It shows us the struggles of all these families to find balance in their lives, spiritual balance, and God doesn't hide the hardships, the difficulties, and the terrible things that some of them may have done, to show us that no matter how low we may sink in our lives, that we have the possibility of redeeming ourselves. And I'll end with this thought. The Christian Messiah is born out of immaculate conception. Right? Perfect. No sex, right? The Jewish Messiah is born from two sides. One side comes from Ruth. From Ruth married Boaz, and Ruth was the great-great-grandmother of King David. And the Messiah comes from King David. Ruth was a Moabite. You know how the Moabite religion was created? You'll see in a couple of weeks in the synagogue, we'll read about Sodom and Gomorrah. When Lot, Abraham's nephew, escaped Sodom and Gomorrah. because the angels helped him escape. His wife turned around, and she wasn't supposed to look, but she did, and she turned into a pillar of salt. That's another discussion we can get to, what that means. But he was left alone with his two daughters. They thought it was the end of the world. Where they went, this volcanic activity, whatever it was, destroyed everything. So they wanted to start mankind all over again because they thought this was the end of the world. So what did they do? They got their father drunk, and each one night at a time, they went and they had relations with the father. Right? And out of this was born, one of the children was Moab, a Moabite. Ruth is a descendant of that. A descendant of what? Incest. Right? Judah's side. I mean, Ruth's husband Boaz, from which comes King David, 2 or 3 generations later. Boaz comes from Judah. This Judah. Right? How does Boaz come from Judah? From Tamar. Judah had sons. A bunch of sons. One of them was Er and Onan. Er did something that God didn't like, and God slew him. So there's a law that if of a levirate marriage, if you're married and you die without children, your brother has to marry your wife. We don't allow that today. There's a way out of it the Torah provides. But so the wife's name was Tamar. Onan was the brother, was supposed to marry Tamar, but Onan married someone else. So Tamar goes to Judah and says, "Set me free. Let me go. I'm a young woman. I can still have children. Let me go." She says, "No, I want you to wait around till my other son grows up." I think his name was Shiloh or something like that. Waits, and he finally grows up, and he marries somebody else. She gets a little upset. So she goes and dresses like a harlot. And while Judah's in the fields one day, she entices him into her tent. And he says, "I don't have anything to give you, to pay you." And she says, "Well, give me your staff, and until you come back with what you need, with the money." So they have relations, and he goes, and he leaves, and she comes back to pay her, and she's gone. 3 months later, it's reported that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, is pregnant. He gets furious. Who could do this? That he should be killed. Whoever did this should be killed, and she should be killed. He orders her brought before him. "Who did this to you?" And she holds up the staff. And what does Judah do? Judah says, "I sinned. It is my sin. You are much more righteous than I." From this birth comes Peretz. From Peretz comes Boaz. So the Messiah, on one side, is a crazy birth, isn't it? Incest on one side, and this forbidden relationship between a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law, right? And from that comes the Messiah. Why? It's to show us that no matter where you are in your life, no matter how low you may have sunk, no matter what your origins are, you can rise to the greatest spiritual heights. The greatest spiritual heights. That there's a possibility of redemption, of tshuva, of changing your life, of turning yourself around. It can happen any place at any time. Yes?
Well, you said something about the myth, or we can read about the myth of Lilith.
A Lilith?
Is that a real myth?
Yeah, there's a lot. Easiest place for you to find it is look in the Encyclopedia Judaica. We have a copy if you want to go to the library by the school now, look up Lilith. And in almost every library in Georgia, when you look in the encyclopedia section, has a Encyclopedia Judaica there. That'll be the easiest place to do it. But if you're on the internet, you probably find a bunch of stuff on it there too. Just type in Lilith. What's Lilith? It's supposed to be another wife of Adam before Eve. It's a midrash. It's a fable, but it's very interesting. Okay. We're running out of time today, but I tried to give you a little essence in the 4 pillars of Judaism. Next week, we'll talk about halacha, the Jewish way, and why is it important to have these set of laws that we have, and what does it do for us and for our souls. And after that, we'll get to some of the halachot in the Ten Commandments, as I do in my Ten Commandment class, which will be at the same time slot on Monday, and the adult education will have a couple of other classes afterwards at 11. Thank you.